Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar. For those of you who I haven't had the pleasure to meet just yet, my name is Eddie Trong. I am the Director of Government and Community Relations at the Silicon Valley organization. We're so thrilled to have such incredible speakers here today with us. Before I begin, this is a little bit new territory for us. Normally when there are elected officials or representatives of elected officials, we always recognize them. But it's tough for me to see everybody, so I'll recognize who I know, and you can private message me if you happen to be in the audience. But I first want to recognize Andre Wara-Makapinlak, who is representing Senator Wajkowski, State Senator Bob Wajkowski at this webinar. If I miss anyone else, please feel free to send me a message. I'll make sure that you're recognized before the end of this webinar. Just a little bit of context about why we're doing this. Here at the SVO, we're all about the business community and all about small businesses and our nonprofit community. But oftentimes what gets left out of the conversation is how are our students, families, and local schools suffering during this COVID-19 crisis? And it's always incumbent upon the business community to find ways for us to redistribute resources and to really help our most vulnerable communities in need. I think that is a charge that is something that we as the business community must take very seriously and with just grave responsibility. And so I thank everyone here for being here today, not only to understand what's going on with our local public schools, but really how can we help, right? And I think that's enough for me. I'm going to pass it off to our moderator. We are so thrilled to you all are here today to really hear Dr. Mary Ann Dewan speak, who is the County Superintendent of Schools. I'm also very privileged to also have probably the longest serving Councilmember-Elect in recent memory, who is Councilmember-Elect Matt Mahan, who most recently won his election outright in the March primary. And so he will be serving as kind of this quasi-elected official until he formally gets sworn in on January 1st. We're so thrilled to have him, and Matt's background is just simply inspirational. Having been a public school teacher and having such passion for innovation within education, he's just absolutely the right person to moderate this discussion with Dr. Dewan. And so enough for me. I'm going to pass it off to Matt. Oh, I'm sorry. Before I begin, I want to let you all know that at any time, if you would like to, there's a Q&A at the end of Dr. Dewan's session. If you would like to make a comment or a question to Dr. Dewan specifically, look on your Zoom screen under the Manage Participants button. If you click on that, you can raise your hand on Zoom so that you can be called on by our moderator, Matt Mahan, and be able to provide your comment at that time. Anyways, that's enough for me. I'm going to pass it off to Councilmember-Elect Matt Mahan.
Thanks, Eddie, and thank you all for joining us today. It's a privilege to be able to be in conversation with our superintendent, Dr. Dewan. Thank you, Dr. Dewan, for being here. It's really, I know how busy you are, and I just deeply appreciate that you're taking the time to engage with our community and give us all some context on what you and our various local school districts are going through and how you're responding to this crisis. I also have to give the SVO a quick shout out for how nimbly you all have responded to the crisis by keeping all your programming going virtually. I really appreciate that, and I'm honored to be today's moderator. So why don't we jump in, and thank you to all of our participants, by the way, for taking some time out of your day. This is a really important issue for our community. So Superintendent Dr. Dewan, I thought we'd start just setting some context, maybe going back a month or so ago. And I know the decision to close local schools was a really hard one for you, for our administrators, teachers, and especially our families. And I thought maybe you could just start by telling us a little bit about your thought process, how you came to the decision, and in the immediate aftermath of that decision, how our schools and especially teachers and families have been responding.
Okay, now can you hear me better? So thank you so much, Councilmember-Elect, for the introduction and for moderating today's session and for your interest and support in education. It's very, very helpful to all of us as everyone is working so hard in a lot of new context. Also, thank you to the SVO for hosting us today. I really appreciate the partnership. And thank you to all the participants for making time. It is a pleasure to make time to have these conversations because there is a lot of change happening very rapidly, and there isn't a single person who is untouched by this situation. The decision to close schools is a painful one. There are a lot of families who rely on the schools for many essential services, not just education, supervision and childcare and meals and social emotional supports as well for their children. And so a lot of deliberation went in. Our initial thought was to keep schools open for as long as possible. And early on, our understanding of the virus supported that. We believed that young people were less impacted by the virus, and that certainly weighed heavily on our decision-making early on. But the decision to close schools ended up coming quite rapidly as we learned more about the virus. And we also started to encounter situations where we were running short of some of the necessary equipment to sanitize the schools on a regular basis. So as soon as we recognized that it was going to be difficult to maintain a high level of sanitation at each and every one of our school sites, then we made the decision in collaboration with the Public Health Department and in consultation and collaboration with our districts. So the decision to close schools wasn't one that I make alone. It is guidance, recommendation, and consultancy. And it is the Public Health Department, the County Superintendent, and our district superintendents together who recognize the necessity to close schools.
That makes sense. Thank you. You mentioned meals, and I thought before we got into the heart of education, we'd maybe talk about a really important function that our school districts play. A lot of people don't realize the extent to which families rely on our school system to provide meals. And I know you take that incredibly seriously. How have your districts responded and continued to provide that function as schools have been shut down? And obviously there are real health concerns.
We're really fortunate because the Public Health Department leadership and Dr. Cody and others that recognized that meals were an essential function. And so as those orders were developed for our county early on, they included the provision to allow us to continue to operate meals. Many of you are probably aware that even in the summer when school campuses are closed, schools remain open and provide meals to the community. So since this crisis began, we have been coordinating through the County Office of Education with all of our school districts to continue and to expand their meal operations. We're currently serving about 410,000 meals a week throughout the county. Essentially, those meals include breakfast and lunch, and in some cases also a dinner.
Wow, that's incredible. For families that are, I'm sorry to put you on the spot with this, but if there are families who are looking for opportunities to find those meals, is there a place they should go?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking it. So on our website, we at the sccoe.org, in our COVID-19 resource portal, there is a document that lists every place where meals are available to families throughout the county. The way it works, and obviously we need to operate very safely, so we just ask that one representative from the family come to the meal distribution site if possible to ensure that as many people as possible continue to shelter in place and that we're not congregating and having a lot of people come together. Drive up is preferred, but we also can handle walk-ups. And we just ask for you to share the number of meals that are needed, and those are provided.
Great. Well, I know we all appreciate the work that our districts are doing to continue to provide food to families who need it. So thank you for doing that. So I wanted to move into education a little more directly, and I think all of us on this call, I'm sure, share a real desire to ensure that all of our students continue learning and that students don't fall behind because of the crisis, and probably particularly that we don't exacerbate existing disparities for students who maybe struggle to have access. So I'm curious if you could start talking a little bit about how schools have worked to try to continue providing educational opportunities despite the fact that schools are actually physically closed.
It's been quite an evolution since schools closed in March. We have been tasked with trying to provide distance learning to our families. And in California, we really talk about distance learning being any type of learning situation in which the teacher and the student are not together in the same place. So that can include online learning. I do think, unfortunately, for many people, they're equating as equal distance learning and online learning. But in reality, distance learning can encompass a whole host of things, which would include online learning, assignment of projects, reading list, web links, learning, such as things that might be available through video or television stations. And I think really where we've asked our teachers to start was providing information and support to families to get them started with ongoing and continuous learning, in which the teacher might be able to provide some feedback. And then we really needed to retool our workforce. So a large number of teachers have never taught in an online learning environment or any type of distance learning environment. So we tried to use the first 3 to 4 weeks or so to really ensure teachers had access to some training. And I also want to just mention that teachers are members of our community. They have children in many cases. They also needed to ready themselves to be at home, to shelter at home, and to take all the steps to provide for their families as they were preparing to also continue to work. Additionally, I think we are recognizing that there are some barriers that families were encountering and setting up learning opportunities at home. And so some of the supports that our school districts, our office, and others are providing is direct support to parents to help them in their efforts to support children's learning. We're very grateful and appreciative that we do have so much technology available. And yet we also know that dependence on technology and online learning is exacerbating some of the inequities that exist in our community, not just here in Santa Clara County, but throughout the state and throughout the country as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm wondering if you could go into a little more detail about some of those specific barriers and to what extent it's devices, internet connectivity, or other challenges. What are the concrete barriers you're facing?
I mentioned one already, which is just retooling the workforce. Another one is preparation for children and families at home. We hear daily about families where both parents are working from home. There's more than one child. Everyone needs to access a device and access the internet. And so just those connectivity problems that might exist when you have a lot of users in one environment attempting to access the internet. We also do have a shortage of devices. Even in situations where schools may have had a one-to-one device program on their campus, those devices may not have been suitable for easy transition to home. And also, when we deploy a device, best case scenario, that device needs to be imaged properly, needs to have the appropriate apps and security functions in order to meet the needs of students. We still need approximately 15,000 devices just to ensure every learner in our county has a device. And then the number grows when we also consider that we have deployed some devices that are really substandard. So what we had, we deployed them, but we know that they're not the best tool to be using in the long run. Connectivity is also an issue, as you described, and one of the ways we've attempted to address that is to provide some hotspots. There is also a shortage of hotspots. We still need about approximately 15,000, 12 to 15,000 or so hotspots as well. And while the hotspots are useful, there are limitations. So that we do know that for some of the online learning live lessons, that the connectivity available through a hotspot isn't adequate for a lesson that might be longer than 30 minutes or so. And it may be difficult for students to stay connected to a live lesson when they're having connectivity issues. There are also some infrastructure issues. We do have some needs just to expand the broadband availability throughout the county. And there are some places in the city and in the county where we do need to expand mesh systems, towers, other opportunities for connectivity, because even when we're able to provide the student with a device and the hotspot, they still are unable to connect to online learning. There's also a need for technical assistance and support, just helping children and families get connected. There's a digital divide in terms of expertise and the amount of capacity that families have just to manage their own devices or their own internet. We're really grateful to the internet service providers who stepped up to help provide some offers to families. And while we are very, very grateful for those, we know there are also some limitations. Not every family is eligible for those offers. They may not meet the criteria. And then some families who are eligible are being turned away. And that could be for a variety of reasons that are important to each of the internet service providers. And so we do want to find some ways to get over the hurdle, some of those barriers.
You know, that leads me to an obvious follow-up question. You have about 90 participants on the call right now, many of them leaders in the private sector representing local companies, many of them in the technology industry. I saw Lenis Gutierrez from Comcast, which I know has stepped up and done a lot of great work in the last few weeks to support the community. But I'm wondering if there are specific, and you started to touch on this, but specific needs or a call to action you might have, and how our private sector companies can plug in and best support what our districts are trying to do to provide distance learning opportunities.
I'd like to use this opportunity to maybe talk about the needs in education and some ways that we could drive interested individuals and companies towards the right places to help. And so perhaps Eddie would be willing to pull up the brief PowerPoint. We are launching an education partnership, will be officially launched next week, but it is up and running already to accept donations. And basically the education partnership recognizes that schools are providing meals, in some cases have already stood up childcare. They're retooling their workforce, they're providing devices and hotspots and other things. And we've exceeded the capacity of our schools really to meet all of these needs. And so I don't know if Eddie, if you can move the slide to the next one. And so what we're working on is how to organize around funds that will support education, health, and well-being of students and families, recognizing that many families are experiencing widespread disruption. This particular fund is going to be, go on to the next slide, it's going to be really designed to address the immediate needs first. And then we're also working on recovery and rebuilding plans. And so we'll be trying to expand the capacity of our institutions and of our community to heal and to move forward from this. Next slide, please. So our immediate response grants are going to be to address first and foremost distance learning. And we're looking for support for devices, for hotspots, and also to help with connectivity. Additionally, the grants will support these other areas. I want to speak specifically for a moment about nutrition services, that while we're providing a significant number of meals, our schools are not funded at the level of all of the meals that we're providing. And so we do need to understand that supplemental funding and support will be needed. We're also partnering in terms of nutrition services with Silicon Valley Strong, and they are providing through the city some additional layered support around meals. But the purpose of these are those specific to schools and school distribution. And then, as you might expect, our young people are experiencing some challenges with social and emotional health and well-being. And so these grants will also help us expand some of the support direct to families during shelter in space, including opportunities like telehealth and connecting families and children to available partners. And then parent engagement and support, such as through our office, our Warn Line, that is providing daily support direct to parents. So next slide, please. What we would be asking of those interested partners, if you're willing to support this fund, Genentech has already stepped up, and we have some other partners. We would really appreciate support directly to this Donate to Education Fund, and this is the information as to where those donations can come. These funds will go direct to districts, direct to schools for those purposes outlined on the previous slide.
That's great. Thank you, Dr. Dewan, for that overview. And Eddie, if it's okay at the end, I think we should take the last minute or two to reiterate this call to action and make sure people have the link in case new people join us. So we've had a number of questions come in through chat. I know some were submitted prior to the session. So I thought we'd start getting into audience questions. And if you, as a participant, if you want to add them to the chat thread, feel free to do that. And I'll keep my eye on that. But I also have a few that came in early. So a few people have been asking, and I know it's early, it's a very fluid situation. You probably don't have super concrete answers yet, but can you give us a sense of how parents ought to be thinking about the rest of this school year, the summer, and what we think the beginning of the next year might look like? Just kind of high level, how are you starting to think about what's changing if we do go back to school in the fall? When we go back, what does that look like? I don't know how much you can share at this point, but I've gotten quite a few questions in that vein.
So I think parents should expect that shelter in place will continue in some form through the remainder of the school year, which means that our commitment to distance learning will be sustained. We do expect, and we've shared with all of our districts and all of our schools, that they should be increasing and evolving their skills over time, and that the experience with distance learning should be improving over the coming weeks. We are also exploring opportunities to offer some type of summer school and virtual learning, maybe tutoring and other online opportunities. But we don't have a lot of access to PPE, to the personal protective equipment, and to the cleaning supplies that would really be necessary in order for schools to reopen in the near future. You're likely aware that most of those supplies are being directly portioned to healthcare, as is right and should be. And then we are also driving those supplies to childcare for essential workers. So because of that lack of supply, we know that it's going to be very difficult in the near term to physically reopen campuses. However, we think there could be some possibilities for some modified opportunities for learning, and potentially if the shelter-in-place modifications allow for small groups or one-to-one types of situations, then our schools are preparing backup plans around how they might do that. So that, for example, might be something like extended school year or compensatory special education supports to students over the course of the summer, potentially into the fall. As far as fall, you probably heard the governor earlier this week talk about how school could look very different in the future, and including some things like staggered schedules, maybe a later start to the school year, and we are considering all of those possibilities. I would envision a future in which distance learning or e-learning may be incorporated into a child's schooling routine, even if we return to campus, to physical campus. And I think that will be necessary so we can sustain learning if we have further disruptions. I'm from the Midwest originally. There may be others of you on the call who are aware of this as well, but we're used to schools closing because of snow or ice or frigid temperatures, and have adapted to providing e-learning days on days when school has to physically close. And I think California needs to tool our schooling system in a similar way so that we could be more ready to adjust if we need to close for a day or two or a few weeks in response to COVID-19 in the future.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Similarly, there have been a few questions about lost learning time and readiness for next year, and how should parents be thinking about their students' progress toward achieving standards, learning objectives, and what it means if they've fallen behind, or how they can catch up, and how they will know if their student is prepared for next year.
I think that all of our families are in that situation. And we do think that schools will be able to provide some boot camp or refresh, maybe some partnerships with our out-of-school programs to provide more enhanced opportunities, maybe even some extended learning. The only thing holding us back at this point is how we would deliver that if we cannot physically deliver that in person. And so all of our schools are making efforts to consider how to make up for lost learning time.
Got it. And in terms of devices and being able to, just going back to the capacity to deliver distance learning, there was a question asked about the 15,000 devices. And I assume that's across all districts in the county, and that's after accounting for whatever existing devices. Have those been distributed to families, essentially, is the question? And then the 15,000 is on top of that?
The 15,000 is on top of what has already been distributed. So that would help us get to a place where every student has a device. And then our next phase would be how to refresh devices that students currently have that are not up to par. The type of device really is somewhat dependent on the age of the student. There are some devices that are more suitable for older students. And so, for example, in some cases, schools have deployed laptops for some age students, and maybe Chromebooks or other types of devices with more limited capacity that are okay and are suitable for younger students.
Great. And you mentioned how you're partnering with the Silicon Valley Food Bank and or Silicon Valley Second Harvest. And I know we have some nonprofits and community groups on the call today. And a couple of questions have come in about how we reach our most vulnerable populations that are maybe the least connected to the district, maybe aren't getting the press releases, for example. And what, if anything, our local nonprofits and community-based organizations can do to partner with local districts to make sure that everyone is part of our plan for moving forward and providing high quality distance learning?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's really important for me to reiterate, I think Dr. Cody would be upset with me if I didn't, that the most important thing is for as many people as possible to shelter in place, to be at home, to limit their contacts. And so the ways that we're engaging with our schools are really under those guidance, those guidelines. So at this stage, we have been reticent to expand in ways that might mean that we're bringing new people into children's homes or to school campuses and things of that nature. That being said, there are a lot of partnerships happening through our digital inclusion work. There are a number of community-based organizations who are stepping up to provide technical assistance and helping families get connected to the internet service provider offers, as one example, and a number who are reaching out to families for mental health support to help address other basic needs, and also to help us in the provision of childcare for essential workers. So there's a lot that we can still do. Also, a number of organizations that are supporting our foster youth, English language learners, and others. And so I would also just mention that the Silicon Valley Community Foundation is also partnering with and supporting some of our nonprofits in this outreach work as well.
Great, and I want to just acknowledge that there are a number of comments that are basically offers of help, people stating different ways in which they or their organization might be able to support our districts. And I think what we'll do for the sake of efficiency is Eddie and I will make sure that we collect all of those offers of help and pass them on to you, Dr. Dewan, and if the Community Foundation is the better partner to follow up with them, then we can work with them as well. But I don't want to overwhelm you with a long list, but I just want you to know there are many people here who are offering to help in their community, and I think want ways to plug in, of course, with that important caveat that right now sheltering in place is the most important thing we can all be doing. There are also, sorry, did you want to comment on that?
I did. I just wanted to, I noticed that some of the offers are around content and remote learning and live streaming and things of that nature. And we have been curating a number of resources for districts and also for parents directly. And we welcome those. We have a whole team at the County Office of Education who are vetting and curating and posting resources, and we're continually refreshing that to help make matches for families, for educators, and for others to connect them to distance learning.
Great. We talked about how we want to make sure that existing disparities are not exacerbated by the crisis. I think that's a priority for all of us. Specifically, there are quite a few questions about students on IEPs and how our districts are thinking about serving our students with special needs. And I was just hoping you could comment on that.
We're in a very uncertain time with regards to special education. Most of the types of things that we can flex or have additional support for related to general education, states can do. But most of those things that we need to happen for special education require the federal government's involvement and support. We have been really trying to support our teachers who work with students with disabilities and all of the extra care providers to reach out to families. We are in various stages in various districts of ensuring that those students have connection to a distance learning plan, they have connection to their teacher, that they've gotten their devices if they need those. And we're providing some services through teleservice. We do fully expect that students throughout the county, throughout the state, and throughout the country will need stepped up services and supports at such time that we're allowed to be together in person. And that may take the form of various extended school years, it could be compensatory education support, and a whole host of other opportunities. But parents should expect that over time, they'll be getting more and more information and support from their local school district. One other thing I would mention is through our office, our warm line, and I'll make sure to share that with Eddie. We have 16 hours a day and in 4 languages direct to parent support for students with disabilities to help with all aspects of sheltering at home, distance learning, special education questions and support. Parents Helping Parents is also providing that support, and there are some other community-based organizations available as well.
Great. I think we have a few teachers and maybe administrators on the call, and I've noticed a couple of questions about collaboration and information sharing across districts. And I'm wondering if you could speak a little more to the the basically professional development, training, and how you're thinking about accelerating learning across districts and across our staff.
It has been amazing to me, the high level of collaboration during such an unprecedented crisis. So our office is supporting the assistant superintendents who are in charge of distance learning in their commensurate districts at least once a week, often more than that. Professional development is being provided virtually, online. There's a lot of consultation and collaboration occurring between and amongst school districts and with our office. I meet regularly with our superintendents. The business officials are meeting regularly, the HR departments. So it's quite a complicated endeavor, but there is a high level of collaboration. I think that I would just urge everyone not to compare districts, because a lot of the variation in districts has to do with factors that are often out of the control of the districts, and also that many of our districts are working diligently to try to solve some of those problems and overcome some of those barriers.
I'm glad you mentioned that. We did have a couple of questions about maybe from parents feeling like different schools or districts are responding in different ways and on different time frames. And I think maybe you could comment a little more about what expectation people ought to have about the adoption of distance learning practices and what people ought to just expect. I know you got into this a little bit earlier, but over the next few months as we close out this school year.
I think everyone should expect that schools' distance learning plans will be evolving, and they should start to see, if they haven't already, gradual improvements and expansion in terms of the offerings and the support available. I would caution everyone to know that online learning is not a requirement. The California Department of Education and the governor have not required districts to do that. We are expecting our districts to get to that place where they can be providing online learning, but we are doing that in a way where we can address the digital divide to the best of our ability. And so I think as much as there are inequities across districts, there are also inequities within certain districts. And so we're trying to problem solve around all of those barriers, community by community, in order to expand the availability of online offers.
And for people for people who are interested in tracking your progress and understanding where we are in terms of any gaps around devices or connectivity and just understanding how things are progressing, what's the best way to do that?
Well, definitely stay in touch with our website. We do provide ongoing information and news releases. We also partner with the county, and so there are times when we're connected to the Emergency Operations Center and the calls that are being conducted by the county. And we're available through our Incident Command Center as well to provide information. But we'd love to stay in touch with the SVO, and we can provide some updates and information periodically through this partnership as well.
Great. Okay, and I'm just scrolling through the questions here. I'd like to encourage folks to add any questions they may have. There are a couple here that I'm not sure are going to make sense for the superintendent to answer, but I do want to make sure we capture them and follow up offline. So I'll be sure to do that. Do we have other questions from the community? Eddie, have you seen any others come in? I can't believe that we've exhausted our audience's curiosity. There's got to be more here.
It looks like there's a question about grants from Janine, and then expanding more upon the state's lack of a requirement for online learning. So it looks like there's a few more questions coming in.
Yep, great. Yeah, I just saw those. Great. About, are all public schools eligible to apply for the immediate response grants, including charter schools? And that, Dr. Dewan, is that a question you can answer?
It is. So the two-county project is San Mateo and Santa Clara. Public school districts within the two counties apply through their county office. Charter schools can be served the grant, but only through their local district.
Great.
And that's for this immediate first phase, and it will be evolving as well.
Great. So I think a couple other great questions came in. I appreciate that. And I think, if we have the questions in time, we'll go about 10 more minutes and then start to wrap up and remind people of our call to action. So one was, I think there's some curiosity about the lack of a requirement for online learning at the state level. And if you could just reiterate what you meant by that, or what that means, and sort of what the distinction is between online learning and distance learning, as you put it earlier.
Great, thank you. So the California Department of Education issued guidance and requirements that schools must provide distance learning during the time of COVID-19 related closures. And distance learning is really broadly defined to include providing materials and curriculum to families, to giving access to links and assigning projects, having reading lists, curating activities and opportunities for families. It does not require online learning per definition. And I think the main reason for that is that the state recognizes that there are some inequities, there are some infrastructure needs, and that getting devices and materials into the hands of every child who would need it, and then connecting them to the internet is going to be occurring over time and will be evolutionary. So that is the main reason that the state has not required online learning to be the way in which schools deliver distance learning.
And assuming at least locally within our county, we're able to partner with other groups, some of the folks on this call perhaps, to close those infrastructure gaps. You mentioned some of the other barriers, but I'm wondering, what is a timeline, just in the worst case scenario in which our shelter in place, or at least concerns about the pandemic, continue into the fall? Do you think we'll be in a position then to do online learning in a more standardized way?
I think that we'll be able to do more online learning. I think that there are some concerns with regard to connectivity to the internet and some of the infrastructure that might require years to build out. But I think that there are some intermediate steps that could be taken to provide a little more robust online learning opportunities in the short term, including getting devices, expanding internet service offers, making the available internet service more robust, have more broadband capabilities that could really support learning. We also recognize that there could be some value in placing like super spots or hotspots out into the community versus trying to do all of it person by person or student by student. And so those types of things would strengthen the capacity of the internet in our county, which would allow us to do more of a robust online program.
That makes sense. And you also mentioned that our teachers are, of course, also community members, parents, have other obligations. And I'm curious, is there any provision being made for, obviously, in the future for teachers to, if they are teaching from home, to meet some of their childcare needs, or are there other creative workarounds that you've thought about?
Well, teachers could count as essential workers. They do for the purposes of, in our current order, delivering online learning or distance learning. And so they could be eligible for some of the essential childcare opportunities. But again, our directive at this stage of shelter in place is to try to support as many people as possible staying home. And so we haven't seen a large demand for childcare from teachers at this point.
Okay, and there are a number of logistical questions, so I'll read out a few of them, and then you can decide which ones you want to respond to. But there's a question about, is attendance being formally tracked at this point? Is there such a thing as absences? And are we measuring level of engagement from our students? What happens with commencement for the class of 2020? And then a question about, or a comment about rumors of students needing to repeat next year. So structural, logistical questions that you may want to comment on.
As far as students repeating a grade, it's our recommendation that children be held harmless during this phase of COVID-19 response, and particularly during the time that we're required to shelter at home. So we would not support practices that have students held back, particularly and specifically, certainly not a whole grade or all students. There may be some isolated cases where retention in grade was being considered already for an individual student prior to COVID-19. In that case, the district may, continue in that conversation with families, but we would not support retention in grade. As far as graduations and commencements, our guidance and policy at this time is that students will be completing the school year on the advertised calendar through distance learning. We will not likely be able to hold in-person graduations. All of our districts are considering alternatives to celebrate their graduates in some ways that could be celebratory and meaningful, but do not require us to be in person. And I also saw a question about attendance and ADA. And I just want to share that we are taking attendance more along the lines of independent study or participation, not by ADA. And the district or the state has held that district's ADA is at, I believe it's the March 12th date. And so no additional calculations for ADA will be made this school year. And I may have missed a question or two in there.
I think you covered those. That was great. Thank you. There was a great question here about training opportunities for parents who want to step in and help provide some of that instruction at home, and how do we empower our parents to do that?
I think that's a really great next phase of our distance learning. We've been providing some, there have been some webinars, there have been some chat groups, some helping each other sessions, and we can certainly do more of that. And I think some of what we hope will come out of our education partnership grant is also some funding to support parent engagement during this really challenging time. And we also do have some community partners and other partners who have created some materials for parents that we do curate. And there are a number of those available on our website already.
Great. So your website is obviously a great hub for information, and you recommend for parents who want to learn more about how to provide instruction at home and supplement what our teachers are doing, that they go to your website?
Yeah, it's a great first place. And then also some individual districts may have resources as well, but I think there's a lot available on our site directly for parents.
Okay. Do you mind repeating what your site is?
It is sccoe.org.
Awesome. Okay, great.
There's a whole portal there as well.
Excellent. A few folks have asked about mental health and well-being, and I know you referenced it earlier. Obviously, schools often are a place of refuge for young people, and I'm curious to what extent there's anything our districts are doing or thinking about doing to provide that sort of emotional support to families and students, so that they don't feel isolated at this time.
It's one of our main concerns at this time. We're very concerned about the social and emotional well-being of our children now that we know that they're safe and sheltering in home. We're also aware that some of our students and parents and caregivers may be in situations where they're experiencing domestic violence or other abuse in the home. Through our partnerships with the county, there are a number of services and supports available through the County of Santa Clara. But we have also begun stepping up efforts to provide telehealth, telecounseling, some outreach that our professionals are able to provide to students and to parents.
And as we wrap up, I thought I'd ask you a longer term question about what I hope are the seeds of opportunity in this crisis, and how you think this crisis may push us to do things in ways that are different and better, and what you think the longer term impact will be, and hopefully in positive ways.
I definitely think that this crisis is requiring the best of all of us. One of our sayings each day is about be kind, assume the best intent, and give your best. And so I think we're seeing our education workforce doing heroic things. They're working many, many hours every day, and they're doing creative things to help accommodate for families and individual students. And I believe that is, in many ways, retooling our workforce in a way that's going to be beneficial in the long term. I think if we can address some of our digital divide issues, that is going to be absolutely amazing for our county and for our community moving forward, and allow us to do some of the e-learning and blended learning types of programs that many of our schools have wanted to do, but have not been in a position to be able to do because of funding or connectivity or other issues that we spoke about earlier. And then I just think that the high level of collaboration and sense of community is helping us find value in the things that matter most to each and every one of us. And I believe that will carry through for us even post-COVID-19.
Well said. Superintendent Dr. Ann Dewan, thank you so much for taking an hour out of what I know is a very busy schedule to answer some great questions from our
They were
community.
excellent,
Yeah,
excellent questions from the community. And I'd be happy to follow up with you and Eddie post-session to address any of the questions that we didn't get to today and provide more support and outreach.
great. Thank you. That's very generous of you. For all of you on the call, thank you so much for joining us. Please send your, we're not quite done. We got a couple quick things to wrap up with, but just one note is in that chat interface. If you have offers of help or questions, feel free to drop them there, and Eddie and I will go through that list and do our best to follow up with everyone. I think we want to make sure we circle back to the opportunity for everyone to help, the call to action. And Eddie, I don't know if you can put that back on the screen and maybe help us wrap up here. But thank you again to Superintendent Dr. Dewan for joining us and being so informative, and to Eddie and the SVO for putting on this, this great session. And thank you to all of you for joining us. So Eddie, I'll let you take it from here. But thank you to everyone for joining us today.
Thank you, Councilmember-Elect. And first of all, thank you, Dr. Dewan, for really your perseverance and the kind of work that you're doing. It must be tremendously stressful, and doing this work every single day to try to meet the overwhelming challenges that we see within our communities. I thank you for your service. I just wanted to wrap up very quickly to say that if you're interested in this education topic, we also have a special meeting with Assemblymember Clara tomorrow at 10 o'clock. That is our education committee meeting. And SVO, this will be more of a public policy response from the state discussion. If you haven't already, you can register that on the SVO's events website. It's a education policy update with Assemblymember Clara. And then secondly, I can't emphasize this enough, please donate to this Silicon Valley Community Foundation Fund to support additional resources for our county schools in need. I'll leave the screen up in here for you to take a look at, but otherwise, thank you everyone for spending your time with us here today, and I look forward to many more with you. Have a great day.
Thank you.